Welcome to Floyd Treat's Finest. He is 93.9 The Ville's host of The Drive, Mark Ennis. I am Jack Grossman. Thanks so much for tuning in to Floyd Treat's Finest, part of the Field of 68 podcast network. Like, subscribe, do all those things I always forget to say. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Twitter. However you're finding us, he's Mark Ennis on Twitter, at Mark Ennis on Blue Sky. I'm at Jack Grossman 97 on Twitter. And I actually got my own name, just add Jack Grossman on the Blue Sky. So that's
There you
fun thing
go.
about the that. Yeah, it was such a weird thing when I got that. I was like, I just tried it just for shits and gigs because why not? I was like, hey, how about that? I'm the first guy.
I
That's
had
nice.
to I had to harass a guy in England named Mark Ennis for years to give up Mark Ennis.
Wait. How did you actually successfully do that? Because I've never heard a success story with this.
Oh, it's pretty amazing. Like I didn't really do anything. I just got lucky. Like I basically would tweet at the guy just occasionally, like, you don't do anything. Give me this name. Because he wasn't using it.
Right.
And I woke up one morning, like everybody, I just picked up my phone and refreshed, and sure enough, like overnight, because he's in England, so he's 5 6 hours ahead. He messaged me. He's like, "Fine, you can have it," and he just changed his name. And I was like, "Oh!" And I like hurry and quickly change my name real fast. He didn't make me like do anything or give him anything. He just was like, "Enough, take it." This was
That's
10 years ago.
good. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. Usually the people that don't ever use it, it's like, well, they never check it, so you don't know that they don't know that
Exactly.
anyone's trying to take the names. That's impressive. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I got lucky,
I
so
love
I'm
it.
glad you
Yeah,
got yours like right off the bat.
yeah. It was very fortunate. But anyways, Louisville beats Notre Dame 75-60 up in South Bend last night. A game that Louisville really controlled defensively from well, I would say the onset, but the onset when we could actually watch the game,
Yeah.
as we all got ESPN last night at the start of the game. Nothing against Cal, Syracuse, ACC women's basketball. Just why don't we space out the times or actually let us, if you say you're going to push it to the app, let us actually watch it on the app. It shouldn't be that hard. But anyways, the first thing that happens is the game pops on. 13 minutes left in the first half. Louisville's out 18-12. They go on a 13-0 kill shot to really take control of
Yeah.
the game. So anything for the first 7 minutes, I got absolutely nothing for you. But the last 33 minutes, it really felt like Louisville's defense is what set the tone and really dominated this one.
The first 7 minutes, I went back and watched the game, and the only really remarkable thing that sticks out to me is that they Notre Dame did take the lead in the game for a short time, and there is a scene where uh, Louisville gets the ball on a defensive rebound coming down the floor. There's a kid on the end of the Notre Dame bench, and you should go back and watch it. On the end of the Notre Dame's bench, that is like dialed in. He's Rudy. Like he's not going to play and he knows it, but he is. He's ready. And he sees Rain Smith catch one at the top of the key and he just sits down. Like he's got his arms up like he's warning everybody. And when Rain Smith catches it, he has his arms up, and he just puts him down. And Rain Smith he just like shrugs his shoulders. And it was funny because it was really early in the game, like you could tell this was another opponent that Louisville's playing where they've made Rain Smith not getting easy threes, like 1A in the game plan. And sure enough, like right before the first TV timeout, he knocks down a three, and this poor schmuck, this dude for Notre Dame, is just like shrugs his shoulders, and I was like, that's they were Notre Dame. It's been a while since Louisville was like the team for these, but like they were amped for this one. They were ready, but had one good segment in them. They had
Yeah,
to the under 12 basically too, I guess. And then after that, it was just Louisville has. I believe them. How's that? Like
yeah,
for this Louisville team, like uh, I believe they're gonna do this to most of like the understudy kind of teams in the ACC. And the thing I keep thinking about so much is that the Georgia Tech loss and Terrence Edwards saying afterwards that we're not a cool team and that we tried to go to Georgia Tech and play like a cool team. Those are his words. We're not a cool team. And that, like, I don't know, there's something to be said for the occasional game that sort of reminds you like you've got to be fully committed to like whatever you are if you want to win. And they've been merciless really since the end of that Georgia Tech game. They've played excellent basketball, and just that game seems to have re-galvanized them into playing kind of this hyper unselfish way. Uh, Again, Terrence Edwards, Eric Crawford had a really nice piece about him and his role and everything, and he said in that article, he quotes Terrence Edwards saying, "I've never really been on a team like this before, where everyone is unselfish." And so I pick up on, I hear little things like this. It's not a secret to me why Louisville's so good. Like they really seem to have a really special group that were really committed to playing unselfishly. And when everyone buys in, like it can be really pretty, and it has been.
Yeah, and you look at just how unselfish they are. I don't think anything exemplifies that more than how they pass the ball.
Mm,
I mean, you think about kind of their kill shot, the 9-0 run in the second half to kind of break things open for good. The play that really stood out was they're passing up good shots for great shots. It ends up with a cross court pass to Javon Hadley for the first of his 2 threes.
yeah,
And it's just plays like that to where, yeah, Terrence Edwards has an open shot. Hepburn has an open shot, but instead they drive in, get the defense to collapse, and then you find a Hadley or Smith or a Kenai Roos who had a three in this game, where it's like they're so wide bleeping open based off of
yeah,
all the ball and player movement that they've had, to where they're not trying to take the first halfway decent look they get. They're okay. Yes, they want to push the ball, they play really fast and all that stuff, but they also have a nice balance to them to where, hey, we're not just going to take the first good shot just because we're trying to play fast. We're going to keep the pressure on you and get an even better look a couple passes later.
yeah. The unselfishness with the ball, and I think they are playing with more confidence than they were earlier in the year.
Oh yeah,
Um, there's a I think they go into every game now. It looks to me like they know they're good at some things, and it's just a matter of which ones emerge, in the game as like, okay, this is what's hitting tonight, or like this is who's feeling it. Because yeah, you're going to get games like this one where Rain Smith hits threes and scores what he scored 12 points in this one, all from three. But like there are nights where
yep,
he's not necessarily lighting it up from three, but like he was 4 of 11. The rest of the team was 7 for 22. That's not terrible. Uh, but when it's not there, like what you don't see is them shoot like 4 for 40, right?
right.
They shoot
Like
in
what
the
Illinois does.
yeah, like they shoot either like 15 for 40 or they shoot 8 for 25. And but to me, like I think that's a good thing because when it's not falling, like they know they've got to manufacture the stuff elsewhere. And so there are nights where Javon Hadley is a big post up guy. A lot of that, or you can see Chucky Hepburn has games where he's like, all right, I'm gonna just probe a little bit and see if it's falling for me, and if it does, bonus, and if not, we'll move on to the next thing. But I just feel like everybody is ready to like get out there together and just let's all find out together whose turn it is to have the points. Is really what it looks like when you watch them play.
Yeah, and you can see they adjust on the fly too. I look back at the Boston College game where Hepburn, has the groin issue, goes out, and it's kind of like at that point it was teetering back and forth. It was right after the Georgia Tech game that
Yeah.
was playing out of a similar mold. And instead of kind of repeating the same mistakes of Georgia Tech, it was okay. We're going to play booty ball with Terrence Edwards and Javon Hadley, and that's something they've done at times, but never really committed to fully in that stance. But it was kind of out of necessity, and it worked. And they went on, Hadley and Edwards scored or assisted the next 15 points for the team. They broke the game open, won by double digits. And for me, really, because you mentioned it earlier, like they're not a cool team.
Yeah.
I think it's a good way of putting it because so much over the offseason, even throughout the season, has been about look at the cool, fun offense they run. But really, and yes, they've shot the ball a lot better as a team in ACC play. They're still about 32.8% of the season, but in ACC play, they're about 38% for threes. That is really, really good. That
Hmm.
is so the shooting, that positive regression has come. But really, where they've made their mark, and I think yesterday is the perfect example of this, is on the defensive end. I mean, yes, Marcus Burton broke 20 plus, but Chucky Hepburn made that a really hard get for him. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's just Marcus Bird's a really good player, but they really limited Tay Davis. He really struggled throughout the game. And the pressure around the rim, Louisville didn't have a lot of shot blocking, especially outside of James Scott, but they did a really good job just contesting shots close around the bucket to where Notre Dame, yes, they were able to get in the lane from time to time, but they weren't finishing very well from around the bucket, which I think is more of a credit to Louisville's defense. And also, just other than Burton, no one else really did much for them. I
Yeah.
mean, again, Tay Davis had a couple of buckets in garbage time. That didn't really matter. Notre Dame 8 of 17 on layups, by the way, which is not great for
Yeah.
them. But other than that, Shrewsberry had a couple threes early and a couple threes in garbage time. No one else in Notre Dame had more than 7 points. So it was very much like we're not going to panic to Marcus Burton being a baller because he is a really damn good player. We're going to trust Chucky Hepburn to make him inefficient, which he was 8 of 18 from the field. And we are going to take everyone else away and do a really good job of making it tough for you to get good looks. And I thought, to me, because Louisville scored 75 points in a lower possession game, but it wasn't really about the offense. It was especially because like Louisville in the first 5 minutes of the second half had one field goal.
Yeah.
That was a moment to where, yeah, Rain Smith hit the three going to halftime to give you the 7 point lead. That was a big momentum play. But you come out the second half, Notre Dame plays hard. They're well coached, Mike Shrewsberry, even if you wasn't too happy with the fans after the game on
Yeah, we
Sunday.
got to talk
But
about that too.
oh, absolutely. But that was kind of Notre Dame's moment of, okay, Louisville's not getting anything on the offensive end. That's their chance to make a run, get back into it. But Louisville was just as tough on the defensive end. Notre Dame had one field goal themselves in those 5 minutes to where instead of it being 35-34, it's still, 38 to 32. You still had that 6, 7 point buffer to where the offense eventually kicked in. You made some shots. And at that point, it kind of felt like, even though it's a 7, 8 point game before that 9-0 run broke things open, that, okay, Notre Dame just isn't going to be able to climb this mountain because of how well Louisville's defending them tonight.
Yeah, and you look at them and like Notre Dame shot 42% from two. Louisville shot 75% from two.
Yeah.
They're 15 of 20 from two. Uh, just a crazy, efficient offensive effort. And I do think it's really a good test for who's ever taken the time to really watch Louisville to see whoever talks about their defense because
Yeah.
there's nothing about them individually or whatever like statistically that like
Yeah.
jumps out at you
I'd say
individually.
I would say other than Hepburn, just because Chucky is, I would argue, one of
Right.
the three best on ball defenders in the country. But
But like in terms of what they do defensively, they're not a slow down team, but they play great pack line defense. And I know they don't intend to say like, hey, we're a pack line team, but they ball pressure more than a pack line team
yeah,
does, but they don't chase and try to jump a ton of stuff. They don't overwhelm you like statistically. They only blocked 2 shots last night. But they just wall up and make you take a lot of weird jumpers. And they don't give up offensive rebounds. And like to see them be elite, like you're going to win a lot of college basketball games playing against a team that shoots the ball once every possession. Like you are, and they make people take weird jumpers. They're you'll see teams like if you watch them play that you could tell like that guy's never shot the shot he just shot. Like, and they make that happens all the time. And the fact that don't uh they don't give up offensive rebounds and second chance possessions. You can almost tell like if there's a game where teams are getting offensive rebounds, Louisville's having to help like a lot. So like to me, they play tremendous team defense, even if one guy outside of like you said, Hepburn isn't like overwhelming. As a team, they rebound as a team. You watch them help, they talk.
yeah,
You know, you can they move in unison like it's the
they're so connected.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, and that goes for the offense too. The teamy connectedness of this team is it's the thing that should win Pat whatever awards he wins. It's that part when you got two guys see the same thing really without even looking at each other. You know, Chucky Hepburn can see that a lob is coming and he's outside the 3-point line, and so can James Scott, and you can see it. and like that stuff happens all the time, and it's why they're going to have a chance. Really, any game I think that they play, if they shoot moderately well from three, they're going to have a chance.
Yeah, and that's something where they are so connected on both sides of the ball, and I love watching them rotate defensively
Hmm.
because they're able to help on the weak side, pick up tagmans on pick and roll, and then recover like that. That's those are very hard things to do, and the fact that I would push back on the pack line thing a little bit just because they pressure the ball really well, and I think they're at their best when they're jumping screens a little bit more than you would see a typical pack line team do, other than Virginia, which always had that classic high edge on
Right.
there. But they don't play a lot of drop coverage. I like they make you uncomfortable a lot
Hmm.
more
Double
offensively
in the
than
post a
yeah.
lot.
Yeah, that's a pack line feature for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes out of necessity because they don't have the size. How do you make up the size? You be aggressive, you double in the post. But the rebounding is such a story for me. And I know
Yeah.
we've talked about this before, both on the podcast and on your radio show. Again, the drive 93.9 the Bill 3 to 6 p.m. Every weekday there. But Louisville, how far they've come rebounding the ball, especially without Casey Pryor, who is by far their best individual
Yeah.
rebounder on the team. I really feel like not that it's better that they don't have all their pieces because I'm never a believer in that. But I think when Pryor got hurt, combined with the fact that you go back to again how bad they were defensive rebounding early in the season in the Tennessee game and the Indiana game, which people forget because they blew the doors open on that game because
Yeah.
they're a much better team than Indiana, but IU grabbed over half of their missed shots in the first half of that game, and
Mm.
that was the only reason why it didn't become a 28-point game until the second half was because the offensive
Yeah.
rebounding there. But Louisville kind of had like a come to Jesus moment of okay, we gotta clean up the glass, and then Pryor goes out. Cater Traore at that point broke his arm as well, and it was kind of like, all right, we don't have these two dudes just to stare out rebound. Everyone's gonna have to play their part. Your Chucky's gonna have to go in, get 4 or 5 boards a game. Ray Smith, yes, you're a shooter. You got to get a couple rebounds a game. Hadley, Edwards, especially James Scott, being able to stay out of foul trouble has been so critical on both ends to where their defensive rebounding percentage was somewhere around 35% after the Bahamas, and now it's sitting in the top 25 of the country, about 26%. That is an insane type of jump you don't see very often. I know we've talked about it before, but it can't be stressed enough how much Louisville flipped the script on the rebounding side of things, especially defensively. That's not stuff we see from teams midseason. You can see teams get better and get worse in some aspects, but you don't see someone going from being one of the 10 worst teams in the country and in a certain stat be as undersized and as shorthanded Louisville is, even taking that out of it, even though they're at full strength, you don't see someone go from the bottom 10 to the top 25 in a
Yeah.
stat. And that is a huge credit to Pat Kelsey, the staff, and the players to be able to do that because that's just not something that we see.
Well, and especially something that is primarily, I think almost everyone would agree when it comes to rebounding and that sort of thing, uh, is far more about art and like effort than scheme or anything. It's rebounding teams are usually really good at it because the guys want to be, and refuse to not be. And I think this team really went through um think about like your friend group or whatever. When there's somebody in your group that's normally like the spokesman or the loud one, like everyone knows who to be when that person is there. And then all of a sudden, if that person is not there, now we've all got to be somebody else. And I think that's what Louisville went through when Case and Pryor got hurt in the Bahamas. And it's why they got just cooked by Ole Miss because I think they were still pouting, kind of in that like he was the focus of everybody's game plan, and he pissed everybody off, and he was a lot of important things, and they basically I think pouted in the Ole Miss game, but then by the time they got to the Duke game, and you have that in between stretch they played Kentucky pretty well without him.
Yep.
And you have the UTEP and the EKU games where you were lucky to get by, but like you could just tell they were kind of, it was fits and starts, good things and bad things. Shouldn't be like this, but like it was going somewhere. And in the Duke game, I've really felt like Traore didn't even play then, but like that was a really great attempt at like what they are right now. Like this is where their season really started right there, was being they slowed down a little bit. I think their average possession length got a little bit longer. They had to, but they finally understood what they needed to be in the half court without Pryor being such a big factor. And since then, it's just been about getting Traore back in and just adding little pieces to what they do offensively. And now they're second in the ACC in ACC play only in offensive and defensive efficiency. And I don't know that anyone would have believed that even January 1st.
Right. I mean, because at that point it kind of became, well, the Duke game, you hit a bunch of threes early. You didn't have the horses to really hang in there for a full 40 minutes. The Kentucky game, you played great offensively. You gave up 95 or whatever it was defensively, which,
Ugh.
side note, it will always be disappointing that we had the missed opportunity of a Case and Pryor Kirk Creesa brawl. There we had the brawl anyways. We had a skirmish anyways in the game, but I feel like you would have taken a whole other level. Both of those guys are playing because they are both the we love you if you're on your team. If you're on the other guy's team, it pisses you the bleep off type of
Yeah.
guys there. But you
One of
got
the I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say one of the things that I think is unique about this team, there are teams like there's lots of different ways to be really, really good. Like, and we can go through uh Louisville's really intricate offensively. Uh, Auburn is not,
Right.
but they're insanely athletic, and like, but they have an identity. And there's Duke's different than Louisville and Auburn. Like, there are lots of different ways to do it.
Yeah.
But I think Louisville's team consistency is annoying to other teams. And I want you to really think about it. Their team consistency and individually guys don't take a lot of bait this year. But I want you to think about how many times there's been two guys get face to face at some point in a game. It's actually been a lot. It's happened in a lot of games because I think
Happened at the end of the game on Sunday. Yeah.
right, and that they happened in the Kentucky game. It happens often because I think Louisville has a really abnormally high teaminess. These guys really like each other and they're really defensive for one another. And I think that they escalate actually a little bit sometimes, and that's okay. But also, a team runs a set and a guy sprints somewhere because he thinks he's going to be wide open and he's not. Only he does that like 10 times in a game. And by the 10th time, he's ready to fight because that guy for Louisville, whoever it is, has done his thing every time. And a guy goes to get it, misses a shot, and he can't get a rebound because somebody's in better position every time. And they run this pick and roll, and it gets hedged, and I have to just stop and start over for the fifth time this half. Like, I see Louisville annoying other teams and other fans with their just the sameness of it. They don't get, and they're not a big loud team either. They don't like get in your face and celebrate a lot of that stuff. I think it's just kind of the flatness of it. It troubles other teams who are like, why can't we fluster these guys?
Yeah, and I would say too, like just I don't know if there's anything more disruptive in college basketball other than a executed hedge on a pick and roll because
Oh, sure.
it's very hard to execute it
Yeah.
correctly, and if you don't, it leads to all sorts of problems. But if you can, I mean, we saw Virginia do this for
Right.
years. So
For
Tony
a
Bennett,
decade. Yep.
you know, where you try to run that pick and roll because that's just the comfort play in college basketball for everyone
Yep.
these
When
days to
all
where
else
it's like,
fails, start there.
yep,
Yep.
exactly. But if you can't actually get into the action, the big steps up and you just have to stop as the guard. You just gotta have this, well, what the heck's going on now? What do I do type of deal. Not a lot of guys have the awareness and the wherewithal to see that reverse dribble, cut the other way, reverse the ball, try to find, the big on a short roll, stuff like that to where it just disrupts so much of what you want to do offensively. Louisville does as good a job as anyone in the country of really just taking you out of that rhythm with something that's very hard to execute well, but when you do, it is such a tough thing to get by defensively.
And I think they do the same thing on offense too,
Yeah,
where it's almost like an RPO. Like every play is everything. Especially Chucky gets a good pick and roll screen. I'm going to get downhill a little bit, and either he's going to finish at the rim, which he does really well. He's going to throw that lob if somebody tries to help, or he's going to kick it out to somebody on the wing, or he's going to skip over somebody. Like every time you set up, they've got an
yeah.
answer. And
It's like,
in
I love that double drag they run where Rain Smith sets the ghost string
Yep.
and then they run the pick and roll with James
Mhm.
Scott. And it's so hard to take everything away, especially you have Edwards and Hadley on the corners where they can both shoot as well.
Yeah.
It's just that's a lot of communicating for a defense. And they're so sold out on Rain Smith right now. That's why I think we've seen that, other than the fact that James Scott has been able to stay on the floor the last couple months, to stay out of foul trouble a lot more often. But because everyone is so high, as you said earlier, everyone has Rain Smith at the top of that scouting report. So many people just have to stick with Rain Smith. Extra guys go to Rain Smith. It ends up getting that 2-on-1, ends up with the lob every time for James Scott. And it's just so hard to defend. You can't take everything away. Louisville's always going to get a
Right.
shot somewhere.
Yeah, you can't take everything away. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Somebody can they're we think about them as like team, but I would also say like as individually, virtually everybody on this team does a wonderful job like finishing around the basket. A lot of off balance stuff and that sort of thing. A lot of improvising around the basket, but like they finish through contact extremely well. Weird angles, and I think finally, I guess like of things about this team that I just like, uh, they're they're still like adding pieces.
Yeah.
You know, the Georgia Tech game, they didn't win, but like early on in that game, James Scott was passing the ball wonderfully. Because as teams sort of sell out to stop Rain Smith in particular, like all of a sudden, I think Louisville sort of spread out and he's hitting cutters. James Scott, stuff like
Yeah.
that stuff. So to see them sort of still adding, uh, and knowing that, for instance, like every game, there's going to be a place where Kenai Roos is going to be like, I wonder if I can dunk from here, right? Like every single game, there's at least one of those with him. So like they're still doing things and adding pieces. It's hard not to be excited about what's out there. And I thought to stick with Notre Dame for one last thing, uh, worth calling to mind this game a year ago because it was
Yeah.
this game a year ago. There were a few inflection points in Kenny's second season that really stuck with people. The Arkansas State, DePaul,
Karan Davis.
yeah, that whole thing.
Yeah.
But then also the Notre Dame loss at home was especially going because they were second to worst in the ACC, and they had a new coach, and he was playing his son too, and all of that, and they just dog walked Louisville a year ago, and it really stuck in people's craws that like it can't. How can they be this much worse than a team in the exact same position with less to work with? And now here we are a year later, uh, just relentless. Like they dominated that game basically from the 12-minute timeout in the first half on, and Micah Shrewsberry unloaded on the fans.
What did you think of that?
Um, it's totally fine for me for coaches to do that when it's consistent with like who they are.
Yeah.
Uh, that's like there are lots of ways to be a coach. Like you can be Tony Dungy, you can be whatever. Like you can be stoic, you can be loud, you can be Nick Saban, like whatever. Uh, he's clearly frustrated with where they are. He did not accuse anyone of jumping off the Titanic, so that's good. He at least executed the rant properly,
Yep.
for what it was. Uh,
He didn't do a true fans thing.
yes, yeah,
Yep.
and since you asked about like his uh lighting them up, there have been several times this year where there have been debates at IU, after certain games. Listening to some of the dissatisfaction with Hubert at North Carolina, listening to some of the complaining about coaches in various places and ripping their guys and their selfishness and whatever. Like, I'm so glad to not be dealing with any of that. And just to hear the same debates. There was a lot of overlap with Kenny and Mike Woodson, like
Yeah,
those debates and those things that coaches say. And like even like this has not been an undefeated wartless season for Louisville. But like even in those moments where they were crushed twice this year, like Pat's really hit the right notes afterwards. They've never used what they inherited as an excuse a single time, never referenced it, uh, except to say that it's not as bad as people were saying. They've never once used the injuries and everything as an excuse. They've explained like it's been a hey, that happened and this is what happened. And lo and behold, Jack, like this, some amazing mystery. It turns out when you don't make excuses and you work really, really, really hard and get read guys right who also want to work as hard as you do, you can have a pretty damn good basketball team right away. And I just felt like his frustration was feeling like we've been passed
yeah.
and worried about people making the same comparisons they were making a year ago that make him look awful. That's how I read it. What'd you think?
I mean, I think to me, it's a bigger indictment on kind of the Notre Dame job in general because
It's a
people
hard
just
job.
that is, and as someone again, like I would have,
I had somebody who told me like you're gonna appreciate Mike Bray, and I believe
yeah,
that.
yeah, and I look at it, I was like, I would love for Indiana to hire Shrewsberry. I don't think they can with the record
Yeah.
that he's had the first 2 years
Isn't that the
there, but
worst? By the way,
yeah,
when like you're
yeah,
convinced that person would be great here, but they can't do it.
yeah,
Yeah,
because I mean, but I think it's not an indictment on Shrewsbury. It's an indictment of how bad the Notre Dame job is. It's not just Notre Dame. It's like we're seeing this with Damon Stoudemire, Georgia Tech, Ben Johnson at Minnesota. That's what made Mark Byington's first year at Vanderbilt so damn impressive that he's been able to win anyways. I think in the current culture of NIL and the portal, I think the worst job you can have in college basketball is one of these high major jobs, but not one of the big brands like a Duke, a Carolina, Kentucky, a Louisville, or or even like a Michigan, Ohio State.
so
If you're
name
at
some
one
of
of
these. Name some of these. We're talking South
a lot of them,
Carolina,
South Carolina, Virginia Tech,
Notre
Boston
Dame,
College, Notre Dame, Minnesota.
where
No,
even the
yeah,
name brand doesn't help. Like Notre Dame, the
right.
name doesn't help Notre Dame basketball.
Right. It doesn't. And that's what's made I think in the SEC we've seen a lot of these schools that used to fall into this, like the Auburns, the Alabama's. The reason they don't is because they have committed themselves financially to basketball that they just haven't in other ways.
Yeah,
And we haven't seen that in again the Notre Dames, the Boston Colleges, the Minnesotas, the Rutgers, for instance, to where they just don't have that NIL to match or even get good players. I keep going back to, Miles Kelly was a star for Georgia Tech last year. Where is he now? Balling
yeah,
for Auburn. Sean Padula had a great year or a great career at Virginia Tech, and he's Ole Miss is one of their most important players right
yeah,
now. Now, I mean, it's just so hard for coaches in those jobs to develop and actually keep the talent they develop to where you just
yeah.
kind of end up in this rebuilding mode over and over again. And again, it's not impossible to get out of it. I mean, we've seen Mark Biden again year one in one of those types of jobs at Vanderbilt be able to probably be an NCAA tournament team this year. But you see those types of jobs. I think Georgia's another one in the SEC that's
Mm.
a really tough one. But that I just look at, I think those are just kind of dead end jobs where you used to be able to do what Mike Bray did and turn that into still be able to be a really good job being the second weekend year after year, Elite Eights, win the ACC tournament in 2015, have a really great program. I just think it's virtually impossible to win in those types of jobs these days. I think that could be a crippling decision for Michael Shrewsberry's career. That being said, he does have a top 10 recruiting class coming in despite all the limitations, which I think he's eventually going to overcome because he is that damn good of a coach, especially if he's able to keep Marcus Burton for a year, add the recruiting class on top of it. But it's just a challenge that's unlike anything else in college sports right now, trying to win at one of those jobs.
I think you're absolutely right about all of that with him. I would also add, uh, I think some of that was him trying to keep his team because you go back all the way to the end of January. They beat Georgia Tech by 3, but then they lose to Miami by 6. They lose to Florida State by 7. These games were close down the stretch. They lose to Virginia Tech by 2. They win in double overtime, and then Louisville played them, and they were up by as much as 18, and really controlled that game the entire game from 12 minutes on. And I think he was afraid after the game. Some of what you heard was him like, I'm gonna lose. I'm about to lose these guys. This is group's about to check out between now and the end of the year if I don't
Yeah.
light them up a little bit. Especially when you consider they've got SMU, Pitt, Clemson, Wake are the next 4. No,
The ACC is not great,
yeah,
but that's outside of Duke. That's starting with Louisville as well. That's about the toughest stretch you can get in the
yeah.
league this year. Yeah.
So I think there was some of that as well. But watching Louisville piss off other fans and really piss off, it's like when I don't know, you go out and like with a bunch of couples and like one husband is super nice, and then all the other husbands are like this guy. Like
The Larry David of the group.
you're making us look bad. Yes, yeah. That's what I think. Some of that. I think Louisville has like NC State fans were like this. How are they this good already? Like NC State, like with Louisville, like it, they've not been able to get NC State to play that well under Kevin Keats at all. I mean, you had the
He had the miracle
postseason
run last season. Yep.
that's it. Yeah, isn't it crazy? Like you talk about like a sliding doors moment. Louisville is ahead at halftime of that NC State game at the ACC tournament last year, and the thinking about where we all were then, like Louisville fans were mad, NC State fans were mad. Oh, we had no idea what was about to happen.
Yeah. Is there a weirder dichotomy than that? Like they made the Final Four, and like that doesn't happen. I mean, like NC State hadn't made it since what the Jimmy B years
Yeah.
since then, and like that's an historic achievement. But at the end of the day, I remember throughout the coaching search, I had this argument with Diener on one of the Twitter spaces back in the
Mm-hmm.
day of he was pushing for Kevin Keats, and I loved Kevin Keats. I remember pushing him for the IU job when they ended up hiring Archie Miller, which that would have been better than Archie Miller, but that's another side note. But he hasn't worked at NC State, and just because he had the one miracle month doesn't mean that you erase the previous 6 years. I think we've seen that that come to fruition this season to where he makes the Final Four. You can't fire him at that point. You have to probably give him an extension, but now you're just going to be on the hook for even more money whenever you do eventually make that move because it very clearly hasn't worked outside of one miracle 3 week stretch there.
Yeah, I'm just enjoying Louisville's coach. I think sort of being in the position of making people unhappy
Yeah.
with their own situations, and I think that there's been a decent amount of that. And the ACC is not good. Like I think you'd agree with me. It's
Oh yeah.
far more likely that they get 3 teams than 5. I'd be stunned if they got more than 4.
Who would be so? I mean, Duke,
Louisville,
Louisville,
Clemson, Duke.
Clemson. Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, I'm trying to think. Is Pittsburgh's really fallen off? Carolina's not anywhere the boat.
It's
SMU.
Wake or SMU. It's going to be one of those two.
I don't know. Maybe I counted Wake out too early. I looked at the metrics. They had that stretch where they really needed to finish off that Duke game, and then Louisville boat raced them, and I kind of X'd them out at that point. But I don't know. I just don't see how anyone. I don't see how anyone other than those 3 teams make it unless they do something drastic coming up in the ACC tournament. There's just, I think this is something that's hurting Louisville in terms of their seeding as well. Like they've won 14 out of their last 15 games, but they've just stagnated in
Yeah.
that 6, 7,
All
8
they've done is
range.
not
Yeah,
hurt themselves.
yeah, yeah, and
And the crazy thing is, Jackie, even if you give them the Georgia Tech win, I think their metrics are almost the same.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, like you look at it, and the NCAA had their top 16 preview on Saturday, and they had Alabama above Duke for the second overall seed, and these are obviously not set in stone in any way, shape, or form. A lot's going to change in the next month, but I think what we saw was a trend that's not great for Louisville. I mean, we had Alabama, Auburn, number 1, number 2, and what was the first thing out of Bubba Cunningham's mouth? for both of them, quad one, quad two wins.
Yeah.
That was the first thing he said about both of them. And when he was asked what's the difference between Duke and those two teams, he said quad one, quad two wins. He looked at why Houston was the last two seed because they didn't have as many quad one, quad two wins as Texas A&M and Tennessee. I think that's Wab was very heavily weighted. Also, the wins against bubble, which is something that's a new term this year. And Louisville is really good in Wab. As I pull it up
Can you
here to
explain
remember
that
what
to
they were.
people for the uninitiated?
Yes,
What wins above bubble is telling people because it is one of those advanced stats that's very good for Lowell.
yes, it is. It's basically described as what your team would do against an average, bubble team. So like how much better or worse you are versus the teams that are in the last four in. I believe that I'm explaining that
I
right.
think you're right.
Yes. But Louisville is 24th in the country and WAB, we'll call it, wins against bubble. So that was something that I thought really mattered for Louisville when they started this push and they kind of played their way into the tournament. It still matters for them in terms of seeding. I thought that, they had that stretch where they beat Clemson and Carolina and SMU and Pitt, all these other teams that were on the bubble at the time said, okay, that's a tiebreaker. That's really helping their WAB at the moment here. That's something that they're going to look at. And I think that'll help their seeding a bit. But at the end of the day, Louisville's 4-4 in quad one, quad two, or in quad one, and that's something that isn't their fault because yeah, they went out, they scheduled aggressively the non-con 7-2 quad two. That is going to help them. But the Indiana win hasn't aged like people were hoping. The West Virginia win, because they've had their own injury issues, hasn't aged how they wanted. And the ACC just hasn't given you anything,
Yeah.
really, to where you look at a Louisville team that's sitting with 20 wins on February 16th already. And you would probably consider them in most years in a normal ACC, probably a 3 or 4 seed
Yeah.
playing, probably not for Lexington, just because Auburn and Alabama are going to get
Right.
Lexington with the way the
Cleveland.
geographic regions break out. But Cleveland would be a really good place to go to. And the all important, if you were to make the Sweet 16, you would get Indianapolis,
Right.
possibly. And that's the other thing we saw go. Then, ironically, Kentucky getting chipped out west, which was kind of funny. They were the one exception to this, but we saw, because the committee goes back and forth on this year between years of, do we want to reward the top 4 seeds with the geographic protections, or do we not want to punish the 1 seeds by making them play a virtual road game in the Sweet
Yeah.
16 or Elite Eight? We saw they put Purdue and Indy. They put they had A&M going to, or that's not the best one. It's St. John's is the one I'm thinking of. They had St. John's as the 4 seed in Newark. Like, that's
Right.
a punishment. And they asked Bubba Cunningham specifically about that. Were you afraid of the geographic implications of it? And he said, we were just trying to balance out the regions. So we do see that they're not going to just say, we're not going to put Kentucky in Indy because we don't want that to be a road game for Alabama. We're not, and that's something Louisville in a normal year could have taken
Yeah.
advantage of. Instead, they're going to be, I'm seeing them as a 7 or an 8 in all the places as I was checking this morning. And you want to avoid that 8-9 game, if nothing else, because oh boy, are the 1 seeds good this year. Like, even if that was in Lexington and you're playing in Alabama or in Auburn, you would have the crowd behind you. That's just, especially Auburn, man. Those two teams are so good. You wouldn't get Duke because of the in conference thing,
Right.
but you need to avoid that 8-9 game, however possible this year.
Yeah. Look, I think the committee definitely kind of showed everybody this is a year where they're going to uh, more heavily reward like wins and
Yeah,
not just not losses. And there are some years where just like a gaudy running up a gaudy record,
yeah.
it seems to
Like
matter
like
more.
last year, like
Yeah,
last year when they had UConn's number 1 overall seed over Purdue. When, let's be honest, eye test wise, UConn was obviously the
sure.
best team all year, but resume wise, Purdue had 16, 17, 18 quad
Right,
one wins. They set the
right,
record for
right.
it.
And now how many SEC teams might end up with something like that this year? Like this is a
Yeah.
bad year for Louisville to not have a lot of positive wins and have an ACC that just can't give it to them. Uh, North Carolina should be a top 10, 15 team. They should.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't like that's Pitt should be a tournament team. They should be, and not what they've been. Uh, this year,
Wake
unfortunately for
Forest
them.
should be better.
Yes, Wake Forest certainly should be better. This is Louisville's almost entirely dependent on other teams utterly falling apart to get ever have any hope of getting above like a 5. I think like if they just have a great end of the season and win at least no, don't lose their first game in Charlotte, the 5 is probably about the best they could do. And then you would need some other teams to. They can't all just lose a couple of times to each other, or else they're all going to stay in front of you.
Right, and that's what we see happen.
And that's right. So I don't outside of Louisville, let's say winning the ACC tournament, which they'll only have to win a couple, 3 games, right? Uh,
Yeah.
like outside of that, it's very, very difficult for me to envision them ever being one of the top 4 seeds.
Yeah, I think
But
you would
at the
have
same
to.
time,
Yeah.
at the same time, you've played everybody. Like you've played a Duke, and you will have maybe played Duke twice by then. You played Kentucky and Ole Miss and Tennessee, and like you've played a bunch of really good teams. So like I think you'd like to think by tournament time, you'd love to see how those games might go. But outside of winning the ACC tournament, I'd be stunned uh, if they could ever get above it to be one of the top 4 seeds. And I don't even think Jack there's an ACC team that could do what NC State did last year. Was like they figured out at halftime of the Louisville game we have one way we can win games, but then they're like let's go win them all, and they did. I don't even know who in the ACC could do that this year.
Maybe RJ Davis catches fire.
Yeah, maybe Carolina. Like you're
Yeah.
looking for a bad team with good players, right? Like that's what you're.
Yeah.
Yeah, they might they might be the only ones. I guess Wake Forest could do that, but they're better than I'm
NC
thinking.
State was like NC
Yeah,
State was playing day one
right,
AC tournament, losing to
right.
Kenny Payne at halftime.
Yeah, so it would have to be, gosh, so what the
Like
NC State
maybe
would
Stanford with the Renault
Stanford,
kid.
yeah,
Yeah.
if he
Yeah.
right, yeah, that would
Yeah, because
be
he's really good.
that might be one. Or I mean, Georgia Tech beat Louisville and Clemson in the same week, weirdly, and then lost to Virginia
Yeah.
after that, somehow. But I
Oh
mean, it's just
God.
it's hard to envision anybody being able to do that. I think Louisville's looking at
Yeah.
5 seed at best. The ACC is looking at being a 4 bid league at best. But so what? Like that,
Right.
awesome.
Like I guess technically if Miami wasn't the absolute trade wreck they were, you could say Nigel Pack, Matthew Cleveland. Like two really good players there.
Yeah,
Right?
but they don't
But they're 6 and
care.
19 guys. Come
Yeah,
on. But like,
statistically, by the way, worse than Louisville last year.
that is that's hard to do.
Mm, I
That is
agree.
hard to do. I think like if Louisville were to win the ACC tournament, but someone else upset Duke along the way, I don't know how much that actually helps them. Like they need to play and beat Duke in this scenario for it to matter. Just because no one else in league is going to present that type of win or anything close to it. I mean, Clemson would be a quad one for sure, but Duke's just that's the only team, and it's unlucky that you only got them once. Excuse me.
Yeah,
But
you could tell, Jack, looking at the schedule makers did not think Louisville would be a factor this year.
yeah,
They
so
got
front loaded.
they was utterly front loaded, and they only got Duke once. They only got Carolina once. They didn't get
Clemson
any.
once.
Yeah, they didn't get anybody that you could tell the ACC thought would be good this year more
Yeah.
than once, or anybody down the stretch.
The other wild thing is like Louisville's ACC schedule, as weird as it was, that as they're just wrapping up the stretch where they had 9 out of 14 on the road, which I thought preseason wise that's incredibly daunting. Turns out they are an incredible road team, and they have been great all year away from the Yum Center. But the one thing that was interesting that I think probably we should have talked more about was you looked at who were supposed to be the best teams in the ACC coming into the year. Duke, Carolina, Clemson, Wake Forest, and then before they fell off, just looking at the pure talent, Miami. Louisville got all 5 of those teams one time, and all 5 of them were at home.
Yeah,
That is a hell of a break.
yeah,
That is something that you don't see very often. So they did get lucky from that aspect. I've heard the argument of, well, I wish we got Duke later in the year because that's when Louisville's playing better. That is true. But you got to remember when they did play Duke, that was also before Duke really got rolling as well. So I don't. I don't know. Maybe you could have a situation where Duke did lose to Clemson, and there was a chance, but I don't know if Louisville would be able to beat Duke. Just and that has nothing to do with Louisville. That's just how damn good Duke is for how consistent they've been basically the entire ACC season.
Yeah, I think you'd love a chance just because if you're
Yeah,
Louisville, there's nothing would do more for Louisville's tournament resume than to win the
and beat
ACC
Duke. Yeah,
tournament and beat Clemson and Duke on the way in, right? Like finish with,
right.
like say beat Wake, Clemson, Duke to win the ACC tournament. Like that would you probably would be like a 4 seed at that point if you accomplish that. But other than that, yeah, I think they just don't have the opportunities. All you can do is try to make sure that you make the most of like these. I think they have benefited from like playing the opportunity to like play through some weird stretches that would probably get you
Yeah,
beat by other teams. Like they've been able to work through it, but like no one thinks Duke isn't good, and they're doing exactly what Louisville's doing. Like if you look at the margins of victory and on the road and stuff like that, like they blew out Syracuse the exact same way Duke did. Like they've done this multiple times. Like all you can do is try to be as mercilessly kind of efficient against these teams as you can. And to their credit, like it's not easy to get teams to like take this seriously every time. And I think coaches, if you could get them to tell you the truth, like realize somewhere early on in the season, like this group's really special in that regard. Like they really care. And we better make the most of it. And I get that feeling from Pat that he realizes even among his teams over the years that this one is especially coachable and will unselfish. And it just seems like when you got a lot of times players are unselfish because they suck, and you do not have that. And
right.
when you get a team where it's like they really believe I'm going to get it back, every time I give the ball up, I'm gonna be on the receiving end of this from somebody else, and they are like you have to just. I wouldn't be shocked if they're a second weekend kind of team. I really wouldn't.
They could be. I mean, I think as long as you avoid that 8-9 game, I think you can beat anyone on a given day. And we've seen this before because of how bad the ACC is. And we saw it with Miami a couple years ago when they were a 5 seed. We saw it Carolina in the 8-9 game when they caught fire, went all the way to the title game. I'm not saying Louisville's going to do one of those types of runs, but because of how bad the ACC is, you can have a team or two. I mean, Clemson was a 7 seed to the Elite Eight last year. Um, you can have teams make runs that are underseeded because of how bad the league is. And I'm not going to sit here and proclaim Louisville's automatically making the Elite Eight or anything like that. But if you're looking for a candidate from the ACC this year, I think Louisville's absolutely that team. I mean, to be honest, it's either going to be them or Clemson because I think they're only going to get 3 teams into the dance. But
Would you be
but I
stunned
think
if all three were playing in the Elite Eight, though?
all three, I think so. But I
I don't
wouldn't
know,
be stunned if
maybe.
two of them. I don't. I just.
It's very
I
easy
just.
for me
I
to
can't.
see
I can't.
Louisville as like the 5-12 pick. Everyone's like, no, not that one. They'll win
Yeah.
that game. And then what, you get a 4-5 game?
Yeah, I mean, I see more like if Louisville's a 7 seed and they draw someone, let's say Texas A&M in the second round, a team that does not shoot the ball well, that turns the ball
Yeah.
over a lot. Wade Taylor's phenomenal, but Chucky
Yeah.
Hepburn can kind of do what he did against Marcus Burton on there, and they rely so much on their offensive rebounding. If you're able to keep them off the
Right.
glass, which Louisville's done a great job of doing, and handle the athleticism and the pressure they put on the other end, that's a game Louisville can definitely win. And then you end up playing a 3 seed or whatever in the Sweet 16, and I'm trying to even think of who the 3 seeds were. I mean, I don't think they would put them in the same bracket as Kentucky, but you never really know. But if you get a Kentucky or a Wisconsin or a Texas
St.
Tech,
John's.
yeah, St. John's. I do. I was having a conversation with because I'm back in Louisville right now. I had that conversation with my dad watching St. John's and Creighton yesterday of how would Louisville do against St. John's. I'm like, well, I think the pressure would be tough for Louisville to handle. But if St. John's has one of those days where they can't hit shots and Louisville takes care of the ball, you can beat that team. You can. But you look at some of these teams, and it's like a Texas Tech who's been good, but Wisconsin, who just hung 94 in Mackey, and John Tonje is great, but they don't play any defense. Louisville can beat those teams on a
Yeah.
given night. I don't know if you have to do it night after night after night, but if you're a 6 or 7 seed, you only can do on the 2 and the 3 line, and it's not nearly as intimidating as Auburn, Alabama, or Duke. One of those three
Yeah,
teams.
you could get like a Michigan State in that. Like they
Yeah.
can hang
Oh
in
yeah.
that game.
Oh yeah. I mean, Michigan State can't shoot for shit, man.
Marquette, somebody
Like,
like that.
yeah. Yeah. Marquette, you
Yeah,
just gotta
Louisville's
stop Cam
issues
Jones. Yeah.
are Louisville's the teams that have beaten Louisville are the very athletic
Yep. Tennessee.
Ole Miss, especially in
Yeah.
the backcourt. Oklahoma, even their backcourt played really well in that game, but very athletic in the backcourt and controlled chaos teams where they don't have like a super rigid half court offense. Because I just feel like Louisville does a wonderful job preparing,
Yeah.
and it's the teams that can just be really productive off schedule
Yeah.
and be reactive. They are the ones that really
Which is
give
St.
Louisville.
John's. That's St.
Yes,
John's.
exactly. Yeah, it's a nightmare. That would be a really, really bad one.
Yep.
Louisville. But like Mississippi State would be bad for Louisville
Yeah.
uh, in that regard. But like I think Louisville would probably love to play Kentucky again uh, with Traore and with the team sort of the way that they are now. You'd like to gamble that Lamont Butler won't go 50 for
Yeah.
50 or whatever.
Or if Lamont Butler even plays in the game with
Yeah, that's
the
true
experience
too.
they've had with him and Jackson Robinson. but but yeah, no, I think Louisville would love a rematch at this stage. Yeah, put it in Indy. That I'm sure that would draw a crowd.
You
That
might get a
even
few people to
yeah,
that one for
you
sure.
might
If you
get a
could get
few
like,
people
what if you
around.
had Kentucky and St. John's and Louisville all in one? That would be bonkers.
Uh, for everyone else, it would be great if it was in Indianapolis, but could I somehow get that down in Atlanta, where I'm ten
No
minutes from the
kidding, right?
stadium? I may have took those days off work in August to go to those games in Atlanta. But yeah, no, it's gonna be fascinating to see. I think again, if you avoid that 8-9 game, I think 6-7 is kind of most likely where I think Louisville's going to end up at this
Yeah,
stage. A lot of basketball can play out on both sides of the ball, but if Louisville keeps winning, that kind of seems where they're bookmarked, which I think is a chance where you can make a run there, but
yeah.
also not where you would prefer to be as a 3 or 4 seed, is what you would normally see with that gaudy record. But Mark, really, really appreciate the time, man. Always enjoy getting to catch up with you on these. We'll see where Louisville ends up. They got the bye this week. They're Florida State on Saturday at home. They couldn't have played that in the middle of the week while I'm in town. Damn it. But it's how it goes. So
After
that
playing on a
go.
weird Sunday night too,
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
awkward.
yeah. So no one cares about my schedule, so I'm not going to whine about
Same
that on
here.
a podcast.